Welcome to AWS Security Specialty Exam. I'm Shadab Akhtar. I'm a software consultant. In this session, I want to go ahead totally hands-on and practical because we already know about control server and remote server integration or passwordless SSH. Lot of configuration we have to do with control server as well as remote server so that we can manage our remote server via the control server. I want to complete that hands-on, and after that, I will proceed to the rest of the topics. So let me go ahead with my AWS account. This time, I want to go ahead with fresh virtual machine so that you can understand well. At least we require two virtual machine. In a company, you will find a distributed environment or master and slave environment, control server and remote server environment. That responsibilities goes to your SysOps teams and DevOps team, admin team. AWS admin team. Your responsibility to track these kind of activities, you should know about core hands-on knowledge about these kind of stuffs. That's why then you can give a solution to your team, security team. There are several things related to the security in this hands-on. I want to proceed with the same passwordless SSH topic. I want to go ahead with launch instance, at least two virtual machine we required. And it totally depends on your company use case that how many server your company want to keep in a passwordless SSH. I want to proceed with my AWS account. This is security checks. I'm gonna submit and I want to go ahead with my super secret password. I'm gonna click on sign in. I will be little fast in this hands-on and practical because most of the step we have already completed. I'm just going ahead with Amazon Linux. I need two virtual machine at a time. This hands-on enough for T2 micro instance. I want to go ahead with two virtual machines. 8 GB will enough, but in real time, your control server storage and RAM should be greater than your remote server, or your control server RAM as well as storage should be, very high level or high performance. This time I want to go ahead with 8 GB storage for control server and remote server and 1 GB RAM for control server and remote server. I want to give a name server and I want to copy this name and I want to go ahead with configure security group. Security group is a firewall rules which provide inbound and outbound traffic to your virtual machine, application, databases, etc. Now I want to go ahead with review and launch and then launch. I have my existing key pair. I want to continue with my existing key pair, Mumbai. And I want to proceed with launch instances. There are two virtual machine. I'm assuming this virtual machine is control virtual machine ID. First of all, I want to configure with controls virtual machine or control server. I want to rename this server, or tag name for this server will be control. I want to save this information. Let me connect with this server. I need a public IP address of this server. I want to go ahead with partition. You can connect via the command line interface if you are a Mac user or Linux user. In my case, I'm a Windows user. I want to go ahead with partition. EC2-user. This user is already available in Linux library. This is public IP address. I'm gonna click on plus sign, then authentication, then browse to key, because this key is not added into my plugin. I want to go ahead with appearance and then change. This is optional. I want to go ahead with 12 size, then okay, then open. I'm successfully connected with this virtual machine. So first of all, I want to create a user here. So sudo is for root privileges. Add user or user add, you can use a command. And this time I want to create a user as control. This user will be available in home directory. Home directory comes under Linux file system. You will find two users here. One default EC2-user, second user is a control. I want to give a full privileges or root access to this control user. So I want to go ahead with sudo vim editor. You can use a nano vi editor. I'm familiar with vim. etc is one of directory comes under Linux file system. There is sudo ers file. I want to open this file. In this file, I want to give full access to this user, control user. So let me go ahead with same thing without password. I'm just going to copy this information. I for insert, I want to press I, and then I want to paste just below to this root. Control and this information. Here is allow root to run any command anywhere. Default root can run any command anywhere, but this time this control user can run any command anywhere without password, no password. I'm going to save this information, escape colon WQ exclamation mark to save this information. And I would go ahead with next sudo vim, and there is SSH directory. There is sshd underscore config file. I want to open this file and I want to change two things here. First thing I want to change here, permit root login. Yes, it is commented. I want to uncomment it. I want to press I for insert and delete. And now permit root login. Yes. Second thing I want to change here, password authentication. There is, by default it is showing no. I want to change from no to yes. Now I'm going to save this information, and then I want to go ahead with sudo service sshd, D for daemon, D for service. I want to restart sshd service. Restart. Now next thing I want to go ahead with SE Linux. SE Linux is one of security file or security directory in a Linux default. And there is one file, config file. By default, you will find a disable. You have to change from disable to permissive. I'm just going to copy permissive, I for insert. And then I want to change from disable to permissive. Permissive means SE Linux prints warning instead of enforcing. I want to save this information, escape colon WQ exclamation mark. And then next thing, I want to switch from EC2 user to control user, because we need to generate a keys inside control user. Sudo I can switch as a root, or you can give another one. Sudo, okay, let me go ahead with -i. Right now I'm in a root, and let me go ahead with control. Sudo and then control. Okay, let me go ahead with exit and su control. I'm going to set a password for control user because I did not set a password. So let me go ahead with sudo add passwd and then control. I'm going to set a password. Obviously, you have to provide a strong password for your user. In my case, I'm going to give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Obviously, don't disclose your password to anyone except authorized person or user. Now, showing passwd, all authentication token updated successfully. Let me go ahead with su and then control. I want to switch from EC to user to control. It is asking password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you can see right now I'm in a control user. I want to generate a keys. I want to generate a keys. So there is no key, there is no SSH directly available in this control user. So first of all, SSH directory will generate. After that, public key and private key will generate. I would go ahead with command SSH hyphen key gen for generate a key. This is the command to generate a key. SSH public key and private key. Now keys is generated successfully. Public key and private key. I want to give next thing. I want to go ahead with remote server. So let me go ahead with remote server this time. I want to close this running instance. Now I want to rename next server. So this time I want to go ahead with remote server 1. Remote server 1, for example. I want to save this information and I want to connect with this server. Public IP address, and then I want to go ahead with new session. In a new session, I want to go ahead with ec2-user @IP address. I gotta click on plus sign, then authentication, then browse key is the same, and then appearance, then change 12 size. For my understanding, I'm going ahead with colors so that I can easily identify this is my remote server 1. So I'm going ahead with cherry color and then okay, then open. Now I'm connected with remote server 1. Same thing we have to do in a remote server 1. I want to go ahead with sudo add user, and this time I want to go ahead with remote. And I want to set a password for remote user, sudo passwd, then remote. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I would give full access to this user, sudo vim. There is one directory etc. Here is a one file, sudo ers file. I want to open this file. This time I want to give full access to remote user. With the same information, I'm just going to copy I for insert. Let me go ahead with just blow to this root, and here I want to give remote. Rest of the thing I want to paste here. I want to go ahead with escape :wq exclamation mark to save this information. And next thing I want to go ahead with SSH directory. Here I want to go ahead with sshd_config file. Now, two things I want to change here. First, permit root login yes. And next, password authentication yes. Now I want to save this information. Escape :wq exclamation mark to save this information. Sudo service SSHD restart. Next thing, I want to go ahead with SE Linux. And there is one configuration file config. I want to open this file. I would go ahead with permissive, I for insert, and then disabled permissive. I want to save this information, escape colon WQ exclamation mark to save this information. And now I want to switch from EC2 user to remote user to generate a keys. SU remote 1 2 3 4 5. Now I'm in remote. My present working directory is a home remote. I want to generate a keys here. SSH hyphen key gen. SSH hyphen.
You forgot why.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Now generate a keys. Let me go ahead with my control server. I want to go ahead with Kate. Kate is used to show the content inside a file. There is a one directory SSH. There is a one file RSA. Okay, let me go ahead with ls.ssh id underscore RSA. Okay, so I want to check information inside public key get and then id underscore RSA dot pub. This is public keys. Here is information. I want to copy the key from remote server to control server. Keep in your mind, this time there are two keys inside SSH directory. There are two keys, id underscore RSA and id underscore RSA dot pub. What I'm going to do now, I want to copy the key from control server to remote server. So one time you have to provide password and rest of the time you will go without password. So this time I want to copy the key SSH hyphen copy hyphen ID. Keep in your mind, right now I'm working with remote server and I want to copy the key from remote server to control server. This is the control server username @ DNS name. I want to press enter. Yes for confirmation. One time or first time you have to give a password. Now you can see number of keys added 1. Let me check in a control server. If I will check inside .ssh directory, there are 3 keys. One key copy from remote server to control server. Let's see now information inside this key. Cat is used to show the content inside a file and okay .ssh and then authorize key. Here is information about remote username @ DNS name of remote server. So it means remote server key is copied successfully from remote server to control server. Same thing I want to do from control server to remote server. I want to copy the key from control server to remote server. So same command I will use here, SSH hyphen copy hyphen ID, and let me give information. So I'm just going ahead here and let me check inside kate.ssh and here is id underscore RSA dot pub. This information I would copy and then I want to paste here. Let me go ahead and if I will show you here ls.ssh, there are 2 keys. This is a known keys, but we required authorized key. Let me go ahead and try. I want to copy the key from control server to remote server this time. I want to press enter. Yes for confirmation. One-time password. Now you can see number of keys added 1. Let me check now. So ls.ssh, here is authorized key. Now let's check and verify I'm able to successfully log in from control server to remote server or remote server to control server or not. Let's see now. I'm just going ahead with control server this time. Previously, we required a password to switch from control server to remote server. But if I will give this time SSH and then, username as remote @ I can use private IP address of remote server because we are in a same network. VPC is the same default VPC for both instances, control server instances as well as remote server instances. So you can communicate either with public IP address or public DNS name, or you can communicate via private IP address or private DNS name. I want to show you the one use case. Use case is I required private IP address of control server. So I can give a command if config.co. If config, I think it is enough. Yes. You have to double check in eth0. eth0 is ideal for private IP address. If multiple services running on your remote server, like a Docker and other services, so you cannot identify which is private IP address. So for identification, you have to double check eth0. Here is private IP address. I want to go ahead with this private IP address. Let me go back. Keep in your mind, I'm working with control user this time. This is private IP address of remote server. Let me try. Without password, I switch from control server to remote server. It did not ask me password, right? And if you already copy the key from your remote server to control server, then you can switch from your remote server to control server. But in most of the cases, you will find one direction. Only copy the key from your control server to remote servers. In my experience, I found in most of the startup company or enterprise level company, there is one-way communication, control server to remote server. In very few companies, there is, bi-direction communications from control server to remote server and remote server to control server. But in most of the time, I found communication from control server to remote server only. Let's see. I'm going ahead with exit command. Now, connection logout. Right now, I'm in a control user. Let me come on to remote. Same thing I want to do with remote. SSH, and I required username @ either you can use a public IP address, public DNS name, private IP address, private DNS name. I want to go ahead with especially for private IP address. If config command Linux command is ideal for accessing private IP address. This is private IP address for control server. I would go back and then now you can see successfully switch from remote server to control server. Why this kind of stuff is required in a company? Because in most of the company, you will find distributed environment, master and slave environment, control user and remote server, remote user environment. So one of example is, configuration management tool. Ansible is a configuration management tool. If you know about Ansible, it's good. Otherwise, this is, DevOps tools. Ansible. Chef is a configuration management tool. Chef is also ideal for configuration management tool. And Chef, Ansible, and then Puppet. Puppet is also configuration management tool. So why the company use these tools, Ansible, Chef, and Puppet? Because they want to push a configuration from control server to remote server. I shows you one example only for control server to remote server. But in most of the company, you will find a 10 node cluster, 20 node cluster, 200 node cluster, 2000 node cluster, so on and so forth. It totally depends on your company to company, or it totally depends on company infrastructure. So it is very painful for the SysOps teams and DevOps team if they are going for manually kind of stuffs. It will be a very painful for admin team. See, for example, this is one server. This is server 1. And this is server 2. And this is server 3. If you are working as a DevOps engineer or SysOps engineer in a company, if your lead or manager will say, hey, we need some tools in these server. For example, we need Git on server 1. Git is one of DevOps tool. We required Git on server 2. And we required Git on server 3. It will be very easy for you. You can go and you can log in into a server 1 and you can install a Git, no problem. Also, you can go to the server 2, you can log in a server 2, you can install a Git on a server 2. You can install a Git on server 3. But it will be very painful for you and your company if your company is working with 200 node clusters. If 200 nodes is running in your company, it will be a very painful for you and your company to install a Git on 200 server. Obviously, it is a time consuming. You need a lot time and you need a lot configurations. It is a very time consuming. So what you can do, you can go to these tools like Ansible, Chef, Puppet, and you can install one tool in a one server. For example, this is your server and you want to make this server as a control server. This is your control server. You need these tools in only one server. For example, Ansible. As I said, Ansible is a configuration management tool. You can push a configuration from your control server to remote server. So first step, you have to go for passwordless SSH. For example, in our case, we have a one control server and one remote server. So first of all, as an admin, DevOps engineer, SysOps engineer, you have to set up passwordless SSH from your control server to remote server. So that if you are working with control server, no need to go in a remote server or log in with remote server. Directly you can SSH from your control server to remote server. And same thing you can do, you can switch from your remote server to control server. And after that, you can write down a script in Ansible. So you should know scripting, at least one scripting language. If you are working either with AWS or you are working as a DevOps engineer or SysOps engineer or as an admin, you need good understanding about scripting. One of his scripting language is YAML. YAML. YAML stands for yet another markup language or yet aren't markup language. Yet another markup language or yet aren't markup language. So you can write down a script for a Git, for example. You already configured 2000 server with your control server. Nothing you have to do to install a Git. No need to go to one by one server. You are going to write down a script for Git in a YAML, and you are going to run this script on your control server. You are going to run your script, for example, YAML, and this Git will install in 2000 server or more than that or less than that server. It is a cool kind of thing, right? You are not spending a lot of time to install and set up. That's why these These tools is known as configuration management tool. You can push a configuration from your control server to remote server. This is the best example for passwordless SSH. You can add more server in a remote. I want to show you one more remote server, how you are going to add into your communications. So for example, see, we have a two server this time. We have two server. One server is a control server, and we have a one remote server. So in our case or our use case, we can switch from control server to remote server. We can switch from remote server to control server. If you want to go for more remote server, because we required a more remote server as per the company requirement. I worked with multiple companies, and one of my company, big data company, there was 15 or 14 node cluster. Application is running on 14 node cluster. So we required a more remote servers. So what do you have to do? You already configure in a control server and remote server. Just you have to follow your remote server 1 or remote server 2, for example. This is remote server 1. You have to follow same steps in a remote server 2. You have a keys in control server already or in a remote server already. Just you have to copy the key from remote server 2 to remote server 1 to communicate remote server 2 to remote server 1. And you have to copy the key from your remote server 1 to remote server 2 to communicate without password. Same thing you have to do. You have to copy the key from your remote server 2 to control server if you want to communicate without password. And you have to copy the key from your control server to remote server, and then you can communicate without password. Same thing you can do for remote server 3, remote server 4, so on and so forth.
I have a question, Akhtar. Can I ask you?
Yeah, sure.
See, if we have a EC2 instance and we have a database, so how will connect EC2 and database?
That is a separate thing, totally separate thing. See, for example, we have this virtual machine, okay? And
Okay.
in this virtual machine, our website is running. For example, this is a website. Website is running on this virtual machine. If your website is dynamic kind of website, obviously you require a database. So there are several use cases for the databases. Directly, you can install database on a same virtual machine, but this is not ideal. Or you can go second virtual machine. This is the ideal way in a companies. In this virtual machine, this is your web server virtual machine. And next will be your database virtual machine. Database virtual machine. And then you can install database in this virtual machine. After that, there is a one, for example, your website is a Java website. So there is one JDBC ODBC code, JDBC or ODBC code. And this code is written by the development team, but you have to provide your database credential in a JDBC and ODBC so that dynamic website can communicate to this database. This is the second use case. First use case, directly you can install database on your virtual machine where your website is running. But this is not ideal way. Your server should be dedicated for the database. If you have separate dedicated server for database, so you can communicate from your website to the database. But you required, database information like JDBC, ODBC connection. There is an option to keep your database name or, your table name, your schema name. So you can define inside JDBC and ODBC. Then you are.
What is ODBC, Akhtar? ODBC.
ODBC full form, I will double check.
Okay, no issues.
Okay.
Even I'll check. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, this code is written by the development team.
Okay.
Then you have to provide your database detail here. This is the second use case. Third use case, you can go to the RDS service. RDS, one of relational database service in AWS. In
Yeah.
RDS, you can create a database as per your use case. For example, you are going to create your MySQL instance. MySQL is most frequently used in a market.
Yeah.
And then you can integrate with this virtual machine. So first of all, you need to connect with your virtual machine to database. So there is a command mysql-h, mysql-h, and then you have to provide endpoint. Endpoint means it is provided by AWS. Once you are going to create your database successfully in RDS, automatically Amazon will provide you endpoint. This
Yeah.
endpoint you can get from RDS, and then you have to provide your username. -u flag means a username. Then you have to provide your password. -p for password. -p flag is for password. You have to run this command your virtual machine so that you can connect to your database. And after that, this code also written in your website so that your website can communicate to your RDS MySQL instance.
Okay.
Okay. Now I want to go ahead with next remote server one, and I want to show you how you can add new remote server and how you can communicate to a remote server one, remote server two. Let me go ahead and I want to launch new virtual machine. This time only one virtual machine I want to add. Only one. And take name I want to give. This is remote server 2. Okay, I want to select existing security group as server security group. Key pair, I want to keep existing key pair. Now this is ID.
I have a question, Akhtar. Can I ask you?
Yeah, please.
So now we have opened everything to SSH public, right? 0.000.
Yes, absolutely.
So if we want to access from control server and remote server,
Mhm.
and we don't want to SSH open the server to public,
Mhm.
like SSH to public, then what we have to do?
There is one port. Let me tell you. First, I want to double check ODBC full form, and then I will come to your next question.
Okay.
ODBC stands for Microsoft Open Database Connectivity.
Okay.
Okay. And your question, what port we need to open if we don't want to open for all, right?
Yeah.
So there is port, let me check. Um, Passwordless SSH, right? Password SSH port forwarding. You mean to say if we don't want to open publicly, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
exactly.
so directly you can go in your control server, okay, and then security, and then you can go to the security groups. In a security group, you need to open only for you.
Okay, my IP address, right?
Yes.
Okay. If we have multiple people, then what we have to do from a company?
They will open their own IP addresses.
Okay.
Yeah, because we are under a same network, same VPC, we will communicate.
Okay.
Are you getting my point?
I got it.
Okay. Okay, so let me proceed now. I have a remote server too. I want to connect with this server. So I want to come in details. I need IP address, and I want to go ahead with new session ec2-user @ IP address and plus sign, then authentication, browser key, and appearance, and then change 12 size. Then I want to go ahead with color, background color. I want to keep dark blue color. This is remote server 2. So same thing we have to do, but only configuration we need in this server because we already configure in control server and remote server 1. So here sudo add user, and also I want to keep a same name, remote. But the IP address obviously will be different, or DNS name will be different. I want to create this user and then set a password for this user. Passwd 12345 12345. Okay. Then vim etc sudo ers escape :q vim sudo. I need here sudo same information I want to keep here. Let me go ahead as a I for insert and then remote. Okay, let me go ahead with next SSH, and here is SSHD _ config. Okay, I want to modify same thing here also. I for insert, then delete. Password authentication and then yes. Sudo service SSID restart. Then I want to go ahead with SNLinux again. Here is config file. I would go ahead with permission and then paste here escape : WQ exclamation mark. Let me switch to remote. One, two, three, four, five. Now I want to generate a keys here. SSH -keygen. Okay, let me copy the key from control server to remote server 2. This is control server, right? And I want to copy the key SSH hyphen copy hyphen ID and remote, this time remote server 2. So I need remote server 2 information. So cat and dot SSH. There is ID underscore RSA pub we required. This information we required. This is unique DNS name. Okay, so let me remove. And this time I want to copy the key from my control server to remote server 2. Yes for confirmation. One-time password. Now you can see this time ls.ssh. There are 3 keys. And also I want to copy the key SSH hyphen copy hyphen ID, this time control. Okay, let me go to the control server. And in a control server, I can check inside.ssh .ssh ID underscore RSA dot pub. I required this information. And now it is asking password, one-time password. Keep in your mind, this communication from, this communication from control server to remote server 2. So what I did, I copy the key from remote server 2 to control server. And I also copy the key from control server to remote server 2. Now, these two can communicate without password. So let me go ahead. I want to go ahead with SSH and then remote. I need a private IP address or public IP address of remote server 2. So here is IP address. If config, this is IP address, and I want to go and test. Now you can see I switch from control server to remote server. I want to exit from here and let me try with remote server 2 to control server. Obviously, I need SSH and then I need username and I need IP address of control server. So I can go ahead with if config again. And then let me try. I switch. So same thing you can do with remote server 1 to remote server 2. Because I did not copy the key from my remote server 2 to remote server 1. So if I want to copy the key, again, I can use SSH copy hyphen ID. Obviously, I required remote server 1 information. So let's see cat.ssh and there is ID underscore RSA.pub. This is information. Oh, I'm in a control server actually. So let me exit first from control and cat.ssh and ID underscore RSA.pub. Here is information about remote server 1. Now, yes for confirmation and then one-time password.
Akhtar, just a question. What is this one-time password? We have to give anything here?
No. One-time password for remote server 1.
Okay.
Okay.
So no need to type anything here, right?
No, you have to provide a password. It won't show you in Linux. It won't show you asterisk or anything. You have to type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Okay. So now I copy the key from my remote server 2 to remote server 1. And also I want to copy the key from remote server 1 to remote server 2. Obviously, I need to come on remote server 1. So here is copy the key, copy hyphen ID, SSH copy, SSH hyphen copy hyphen ID, and then I want to go for information this time. Cat, this is remote server 2, SSH, and here is ID underscore RSA.pub. Okay, so this information is for remote server 2. I'm going to copy the key from remote server 1 to remote server 2 this time. So yes for confirmation. This time, this password is for remote server 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now edit key. Let me switch now. So right now I am in a remote server 1. Keep in your mind, I am this time on remote server 1. So you can identify your server via the IP addresses. So this is remote server 1. I want to switch from remote server 1 to remote server 2. Why? Because I already copy the key from my remote server 1 to remote server 2, and I already copy the key from remote server 2 to remote server 1. So both server can communicate to each other. Let me go ahead, SSH hyphen SSH and then remote. I need remote server 2 IP address. So here is if config, here is IP address. Now I want to go ahead. You can see I switch from remote server 1, which is 35.168. I switch from remote server 1 to remote server 2, 6.170. I want to exit. I can do now from remote server 2 to remote server 1. Remote server 2 is 6.170 and remote server 1 is 35.168. No. Yes, absolutely. 35.168. So let me go ahead, SSH, and then control, remote. Yes, an IP address of remote server 1. So remote server 1 IP address is if config. Okay, this is 35.168. So I'm in 6.170 and I would switch to 35.168. Now you can see 35.168. Hope that you are getting my point. So this means it is passwordless SSH. If you are joining a company and you want to work on distributed environment, master slave environment, control server, remote server environment, or you want to work with configuration management tool, so you have to set up these securities. You have to set up these configurations to communicate from one server to another. So hope that you are getting my point. It will be enough for my side for today. Thanks to listen to me. In the next session, we'll continue with next.
Yeah, can you please give me these code? I mean,
recording.
What we call comments.
I will share with you these recording. You can double check again.
Oh, sure, Akhtar. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. So
yeah, tomorrow we'll meet again. Okay. Thank you.
Same time.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Take care.